everyone. Welcome. I'm Ruth from Inspiring Workplaces. Slowly losing my voice this week. A mixture of doing amazing things like this and shouting at my children. But welcome to everyone who's joining us live and also to anyone that's watching on demand. I am Managing Director of the Academy here at Inspiring Workplaces, and I'm so delighted and excited to introduce this superstar to the stage, Claire de Carteret. Hello, Claire.
Hello, Ruth. Hi, everybody. I'm Claire de Carteret. I'm the Regional Director at Gallup for Europe, Middle East and Africa. Yes, you detect an Australian accent. That's right. So I've been at Gallup for 15 years as a Regional Director and mostly working across Asia and Pacific. I relocated to the UK, based in London in 2020. Start of 2020, so quite a time to make a big international move with my family. But in my capacity as director at Gallup, I work with organizational leaders and our teams right across Europe, Middle East, and Africa to create more exceptional workplaces through analytics, advice, and learning. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Claire. And wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that you moved right before a pandemic.
Yes.
Wow, I'm not. It wasn't a small move either. So wow, that's inspiring just to kick us off. So you can already probably hear the links between what Gallup and what Claire's doing over at Gallup and what we're doing over here at Inspiring Workplaces. So we're a global community of inspirers working together to change the world through the world of work, and be that through our content, our research, our webinars, our conferences and our awards, our academy, our consultancy, and everything else in between. So yeah, today we're talking about, as you can see here, navigating work in a post-pandemic world. I actually can't even really believe we're talking about a post-pandemic world. Like, I mean, it hasn't ended, and I'm sure it's probably here for a long time. But the fact that we're able to start talking and moving on and talking about some of those learnings, in 2 years have struggled to see this day actually coming. So in a way, it almost feels a little bit exciting, right, Claire?
Definitely. It does feel like we're turning a corner, although at the same time, COVID is closer than ever to most people around us. But leaders are thinking about, well, how do we plan for this workforce of the future? What does that look like? What do we need to measure for? How do we pull people back? So lots of stuff I'm sure we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So this webinar will last no longer than 52 minutes. Anyone that's ever attended a workshop or a webinar with me know that I like to be quite strict on not taking up too much of your time, but making sure we get the optimal attention from everyone here. And on that note, if anyone does have any questions or comments or thoughts or opinions or anything you want to say at all related on this subject, either as you hear me and Claire talking or even right now, please do pop them in the comments, whether you're watching live via our website or via YouTube. But please do pop them in, because we can see them and we can share them. We won't share all of them, but we can share them. So please do that, because this is really an open conversation. So yes, it is an open conversation. Me and Claire are going to be having a chat. Think of this as kind of half webinar, half podcast, and you can see our faces. We're going to be sharing a bit of the research and the amazing work that Gallup have been doing, as well as the research that's come from our recent Global Perspectives report, where we went out to our community of inspirers to ask them, what do they need now? That report was only published today if you're watching live, or you can probably access it now if you're watching on demand. So we're going to be talking about that, but also talking about some of the trends that we're seeing coming through now, and the so what. So what does that mean if you're an employer or someone working in an organization and you're really passionate about this change and getting it right so that you can thrive for the future? So keep the questions and comments coming in, and I really hope you enjoy the next 49 minutes or whatever we have left. So post-pandemic world, let me bring up, we're going to have a few visuals to share with you as well. Post-pandemic world. Claire, what is the kind of, what have been the positives, do you think, that have come through from COVID that you've seen as a change in the workplace?
Great question. Thank you. So we've been studying this at Gallup right from the start, and in fact, beyond that, because at Gallup we've been studying the workplace and human behaviour for over 80 years. And we're forensic about understanding the impact of life at work and work on life and all of those combinations. So we've got the most advanced analytics to do with the workplace. There's been a lot of good that's come out of it, Ruth, in terms of just catalyzing some positive change, disrupting our ways of working that were in some cases quite traditional and antiquated, exposing barriers to engagement and to true well-being. So there's been a lot of good that has come out of it in terms of disrupting and changing. One of the things that we study forensically at Gallup is this idea of engagement, the emotional connection that individuals have with their workplace. And we look at it by organization, by work group, and with a representative sample of 98% of the world's population, which is a representative sample of almost every single country in the world except for 2. And that's because we can't go into those countries. And we do that every year. We've been doing it now for 12 years. So we've got a longitudinal view. For the first time ever, we saw engagement and well-being separating. So they used to track quite in a linear way. We also saw the same of satisfaction. So companies with highly engaged workforces were more resilient and they remained engaged. And companies that didn't have engaged workforces obviously didn't remain engaged. But satisfaction diverged from engagement as well. So there's been a lot of really key leadership moments through the last 2 years.
Wow, that's really interesting, that separation. And I've not heard that yet, but that is really interesting that they are separating and potentially going further apart, something we'll explore, I'm sure, more. I completely agree about the positives and the way COVID was the catalyst to accelerate areas around flexible working, around having to trust your people. You just had no choice, and seeing the results that follow, and maybe in the short term around mental well-being and health for people. But we are starting to see some trends now, as you've just alluded to, or as I've just told us, that if we don't tackle them now, there's going to be another crisis on the way, right?
Absolutely. If you're familiar with Gallup's book, Wellbeing in the Workplace, for anyone listening, the very first line of that book says, what if the next pandemic is the mental health pandemic? It is here now. So this crisis is here now. And we believe that for the first time ever, employers are taking a bigger responsibility for the impact of well-being in their workplace and how well-being can be, people can have a fulfilling life through their work. We do believe and have seen evidence that work has a net positive impact on people's lives. It can also have the exact opposite. But because daily anger is rising, sadness, depression, loneliness, and isolation, all of these markers are rising just as we're studying global warming is rising, sea levels are rising, anger is rising, depression is rising. And so there is just a mutual obligation for leaders, communities, all collective to come together and to address some of these issues.
Wow, it's here. Everyone heard it right here. It's here. The well-being crisis isn't on the horizon. It's here, and we need to tackle it, and we need to tackle it now. So I'm going to start with one of the key headline stats that came from our recent research from the Global Perspectives report that I mentioned. One, it was quite alarming, not alarming, but I was quite surprised, I would say, by this statistic. Around 88% of us are missing or wanting more social interaction with our colleagues, because everyone I seem to speak to, which isn't a global representation across the world except for 2 countries, but everyone I seem to speak to is very clear that I don't really want to go back into the office. I'm happy. But then when we ask them, what is it that you're missing and do you miss it? Like, a large proportion of people said that they miss or they want their social interaction with their colleagues. Is your data showing this too, Claire?
I think it definitely is. There's something about contrast that creates clarity, and what we know is that people don't want to return to the workplace, to the office, in a full-time capacity, but the thing that they want to go in for is exactly this. It's the interaction with their colleagues. We need to think differently about bringing people back in and almost creating a production studio, or a way that people come together to ideate, to brainstorm, to meet as teams in almost a production type of a way that's exciting and energizing, before they go back and do their heads down work at home. One of the organizations we know very well has got a heads down, heads together, and heads up approach to almost categorizing their work to help people think, well, when would be the right day to go into the office? But certainly the social piece is absolutely critical to well-being, to productivity. One of the questions that we ask is, I have a best friend at work. And this is such a clear marker of psychological safety and longevity with an organization, when people feel like they've got trusted friends in the workplace.
Wow. I agree with you about these production centres. I'd long said, even pre-pandemic, that I saw the future of the workplace, or the physical workspace, being much more around like community centres, places that people wanted to go to get their social interaction needs. But this stat isn't necessarily saying that just because 88% of people are missing or wanting social interaction with their colleagues, that has to be done in a physical work environment or in a heads together, heads up, heads down. I love that, by the way. But it's just saying that, the way that we're working right now, whether that is from home or whether that is in a workplace, however we're doing it, people are still needing more social interaction, and that can be done in different ways as well. I know that you've got some data to share with us as well, and a lovely like quote here around well-being, and I love the image too. That looks just like my twin 2-year-olds.
Oh yeah, your twin 2-year-olds. That's right. And let's hope they're not doing that without a helmet. So the thing that we know about development and goals, and so the same can be said of well-being. One thing that we know about well-being is that it is absolutely reliant on other people. Love is a key element, whether that's the romantic kind or a love of your colleagues. But that is an essential human need, and other people really matter. Other people to recognize you, see your contributions, reinforce the right behaviors. So that's a key element. But when we looked at, on the next slide, the amount of people that want to come into work, we know that 7 in 10 want to work hybrid or remote. There's 3 reasons that they want to work hybrid or remotely and not come back in full time. And that was my commute, my well-being, and my family. If that was a cocktail, it would be called my new freedom. And the challenge for leadership, and I see futuristically the challenge for office spaces, especially with this metaverse that's coming down the pike, is what do we do with this real estate? How do we bring people together in a world where people don't want to come in? Now, because this is coinciding with a critical juncture of the Great Resignation, the turnover tsunami, or what we call the Great Move Home or the Great Disengagement, if an individual doesn't like the mandate or the policy of the organization to come back into the office 3, 4, 5 days a week, they have got an opportunity right now to move. It's a candidates market, and it will be a good job market for years to come. So this is a really pivotal leadership moment. Do you force people to come back in, or do you resist that urge and individualize the way people want to work? And it's a big one. It's really hard.
Yeah, and I'm seeing organizations getting it catastrophically wrong right now, and I don't think they've seen the impact of them getting it wrong just yet. There's I live in a small cul-de-sac, small like neighborhood area, and all of our neighbors, we're all really close to one another, and particularly during the pandemic when we could only talk at a distance out in the street, like we got to talk about it. But now I know of two people where I live in this small community who work for organizations, one of which has been told he must commute into the office 5 days a week, even though the majority of his team are in another country. So he sits on a Zoom call with them, but in the office. And he is so resistant to this that he's already handed in his resignation. And the only reason, he's worked there for years, he loves it, he's just had a promotion, he has a really good team, but the only reason is because of the insistent nature of the leadership at that company on forcing him for 5 days a week without a real reason behind it, other than just filling the real estate.
Right.
Yeah, and then another really close friend of mine has been told you must be in the office 3 days a week. It was still hybrid, right? Still get to work from home 2 days a week, but you must be in the office, and these are the days you must go in. Now, this friend of mine has 3 young children, and so you're talking about the family there, you're talking about the reasons there as well. And this friend of mine is at the latter stages of an interview with another company as well. And these are just 2 people like in my immediate neighborhood. These are real examples happening all over the world, and I know that your research is showing that the organizations that are like, yeah, we embrace hybrid, just come in half the week, these people are going to be leaving because we're not giving the ownership or the decision making down to the employees. We're just trying to fill seats for.
Yeah, right. And when it comes to flexibility, true flexibility is the ability to wake up that morning and decide, will I go in or not? Really hard to manage from a leadership perspective, but that's what people are looking for. So it is something we need to be aware of. There's other challenges with it as well in terms of knowledge transfer, how to really get people connected from a belongingness point of view. And right now, culture is corporate culture, organizational culture has never been more important to measure and to manage. Without knowing what that new dashboard looks like, are we measuring the right things? Do we know what's going on? Everything's just a hypothesis and a hunch. And so, to your point, Ruth, we don't know the true impact unless this is being measured at the organizational level and they can see how connected people are, what that belongingness is. Matt mentioned a comment in the chat section around, do we need to do more to communicate that people need each other? A lot of what I've seen great organizations do exceptionally over the last year or so is find ways to pull people back in. So rather than push, it's a pull. Things like weekly learn at lunch, where there's a lovely healthy lunch available, and people might make the decision that day to come in because they're going to be learning about a great topic, and there's a nice lunch there. So team days where there's an element of the fun factor, that element of jiving together, if we keep that production studio metaphor going. And that's where people will get their energy and that connective tissue from. But that takes a new mode of management and thinking.
A new way of thinking. And I love, again, I said it again already, but I love the heads up, heads together, heads down way of thinking. But the new way of thinking and bringing people back into the office for a reason rather than it being a rule or a mandate or a seat filler, that is going to take a new approach to how you manage people, right? That's going to take a new approach to how managers measure performance and the whole output versus input, and that a whole new way of thinking and a whole new mentality, which is good.
The outcome, hold accountability, support along the way, review the outcome, though, ask, don't tell. Those are skills that don't come naturally to everyone, and nor have we all been managed in that way. So that would be a shift that needs to happen as well. And it is happening in a lot of organizations.
It is. Do you want to talk about this one, Claire?
So a little bit of what I've already talked about, but it's really about the measurability of well-being. So we categorize people into 3 psychological well-being groups: thriving, struggling, and suffering. And we have been looking at this connection between well-being and the role that work has on people's overall well-being, which is more than just work. And so what we're seeing is that people want more flexibility. That thriving element is largely through that autonomy and that empowerment.
So people want more flexibility, but they want to be but they also really want to see people. But let them make decisions on how they see people. Create the right environment. Create the production center or the community center, however you want to call it. But create that right environment. And I have seen some incredible workplaces who have maybe got rid of half the desks, but created that into a well-being space or a collaboration space or a heads together space, and repurposing their space. So they're still paying for the same amount of real estate, but they're repurposing that space to entice people for the right reasons to be together, rather than everyone. There's a stat: 88% people miss people. Let's bring everyone back to sit on Zoom calls. It makes sense. This is the second piece from our recent research, is that 74% of people are finding it just as hard or harder to create boundaries. And this is around both the mental and the physical boundaries. Now, I know that had we have been running this as a live event today, I wouldn't right now have 3 children in the house who have been sent home from nursery and school unwell. They are under supervision of another adult. Just point that out to everyone. But, I know that because I would have been maybe in the office. I would have had that commuting time. I would have had that space maybe. But creating those boundaries, there will be no commute after this today. I will go straight into bath time. And that's the same for other people through their different commitments, but also the mental boundaries as well. So talk to me about some of your analysis on boundaries for people. Do you have any of them?
Definitely. And this is a really tricky one, because with all of the elements of flexibility that comes from working from home, being more with my family, having higher well-being, eliminating that commute time, there's also a real blur. We used to have that third space, if anyone's ever read that book, Third Space, which was that space between work and home that allowed us to close off and move on and transition, if you will. And now we don't have that space at all. That's gone. Excuse me, I've got somebody calling my name out at the moment. Just one moment. I'm sorry. Speaking of kids in the background, I've got somebody calling my name in the background. So that's a real blend of the work-life integration.
No, it's topical, right? The boundaries.
So, I'm sorry. I have to excuse myself for 1 minute.
That's all right. So if anyone's watching live right now that wants to share anything with us around how they are finding it hard to manage boundaries, or maybe how they are helping their people to manage those boundaries, that would be really helpful, because we are going to move into some of that. So what? Like, how do we help, or how do we do that? I know of some organizations who are enforcing the commute time. not enforcing, but encouraging in replace of that commute time, they're turning that into well-being time, and encouraging and holding accountable their employees to dedicate that lost commute time into well-being time rather than just starting work earlier. So I just moved it a little bit then, Claire, into the so what. How do we help people with creating these boundaries when there aren't any?
And I just demonstrated that. So that was all a setup, that whole incident. No, I do apologize. But this is part of the boundaries there, or the lack thereof in some cases, and also humanizing the workplace. So suddenly you're transported into somebody's room, you see their paintings, you see their life, and that has its own challenges as well. I really like that article several years ago now, pre-pandemic, in the Harvard Business Review, and it was called Leaders Leading Loudly. And I think there's a real obligation on leaders to be voluminous in, I'm clocking off early because I've got to take the children to here, or I've made a commitment here. And if leaders do that, it creates that permission, if you will, for others to integrate work and life. So rather than work-life balance, I think it's more about work-life integration.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best leaders I ever worked for, he was very, very open about leaving and not being around for life, and he would start every single one-to-one with me asking me about my life, and he was very open, and he would just leave the office in the middle of the day and say, I'm going to go and do this, or I'm going to go and walk the dog, and I'll be back. And he kind of set that, well, we call it a leadership shadow. Like, you leave your leadership shadow, and everyone kind of follows in that leadership shadow, and that will continue to happen, I'm sure, because that's how we learn. And we've had some feedback here from Coach the Difference. I work from home. I ensure that I take a commute walk before I start the day and at the end of the day to help me get the space and boundary that I need. Absolutely. And well done to you, because I know that is really difficult to do. And for some people, there's always something else you could be doing that can seem more urgent over the importance of overtaking that commute. So the next stat that came from our research was 98% of people feel that they can be their true selves at work. And interestingly, if we delve a bit deeper into that, almost 50% of people said that was more the case since COVID. So it's 50% more now feel that they can be themselves. You just talked about this, Claire. People seeing our paintings, seeing our children, seeing our dogs, seeing the inner workings of our house, seeing the beds when people are working in their bedroom, seeing your garden, being just people automatically. We just had to open up our houses, and this is before we even learned about Zoom filters and other backgrounds that we could put on. So there's not just opening up our homes, but opening up our minds. The rise in definitely in the discussions and the work that's happening around inclusivity. I know we have a really long way to go, but just this time last week, we were running a webinar on the importance of recruiting and retaining neurodivergent talent. It's a subject that we weren't even be talking about 2 years ago. And now we are able to have these conversations a lot more.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you noticed people are this whole area around authenticity, authentic leadership, or people being authentic, people being able to be themselves? Do you feel like that's here to stay?
Absolutely. I think it's very hard for organizations to individualize like that or know the right way. But at Gallup, we have got an approach to individualization, which is called strengths-based development or strengths-based leadership.
Yeah.
So it's the study of strengths over stereotypes. And everyone has different strengths. And so we have over 27 million people that have completed this assessment to reveal their strengths. And when people know their strengths and work to their strengths, they're more authentically themselves. They lead better. They're aware of their filters and biases. They individualize their approach to other people's needs and to what they do best. So it's a big shift away from that standardization to that individualization. And it's emerging. It's definitely very topical and needs to be addressed by every organization. Yeah.
Yeah. And the organizations that I see that are getting this right, where the higher percentage of people there feel that they can be their true selves, is because it's being led from the top. Leaders are having to be almost the most vulnerable
Right.
in an area where they felt they couldn't be previously. They're having to open themselves up a lot more and admit faults and be open about their difficulties and be open about their own personal struggles as well, because in turn that's creating a culture where people feel safe. You talked about psychological safety earlier on, where people feel that they can be safe to be themselves without fear of judgment. So I think that's a really important. It's here to stay, but don't get complacent with it, because we need to ensure that it continues.
Tell the stories. Tell the stories. And then the other thing that we would always recommend at Gallup is measure it. Measure inclusion. Measure how people are feeling. Do they have a sense that they're being respected? Do they have the sense that they can be their true self in that workplace? And that's critical, because what gets measured gets managed.
Yeah. And another great twin image for you, Claire.
I think we've talked about this. The next one is a study of 1.4 million people. And it was a study that it was largely catalyzed by the rise of millennials in the workplace and understanding what they wanted from the workplace, what their expectations were. But whether you're a millennial or not, you can probably identify more with what says our future or our present, which is on the right-hand side here. So there were 6 big shifts that we noticed in this study of 1.4 million people. People used to come to work for a paycheck. Now it's more critical for them to come to work for a sense of purpose and contribution. So as leaders, the so what there is, why do we exist? How are we telling stories about that? How do we connect individuals to why we exist every day, so they know how their role leads to that? It used to be about being satisfied, rationally satisfied with work. Now it's about, how do I develop? How do I grow? Anyone who's a hiring manager here or works with any hiring managers knows that a lot of the new workforce are looking to understand how they build, what their trajectory is for development in the organization. It's also one of the number one reasons why people are leaving through the Great Resignation, is for career advancement and development. We used to have a boss, now we want a coach. We talked a little bit about that kind of manager as coach and the new mode there. It was annual reviews where people didn't really know where they stood. They were based in the past, somewhat punitive or judgmental. Now we want ongoing conversations, real-time feedback. So that's a big shift. We used to be focused on weakness filling, and now it's about strengths development. And then finally, it was, my job was just my job, and now everybody's job is part of their identity. So those big shifts are critical as we think about, well, how do we organize the system of work? How do we organize it so people can use their strengths, that they do see a sense of contribution, that we can coach them rather than boss them, that we give real feedback. So all of those things are really applicable to the work that this community does.
The bit around our future, that's, for me, that's the organizations that are getting it right now. And the bit about the past is, I'm thinking of so many organizations that are getting it wrong because they're doing those things right now, right?
Yeah.
And the results are clear between the two as well. You talked about people leaving a job for development opportunities. Is it still the same that 2/3 of people leave a job because of, well, they don't leave the job, they leave the manager?
Yes, the manager has a disproportionate impact on the experience of your work every day. Startlingly, and I don't love sharing this statistic, but 1/3 of people hate their manager.
It's a strong word as well.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And that means that they don't want to spend time with them. I often do an exercise where I ask people to think about how many managers they've had in their career and how many of them were exceptional, how many of them were terrible, and how many of them were, had their good days and their bad days. And most people say, about a third were exceptional. So 3 in 10 for a lot of people about this stage in their career, wherever they are, have had maybe between 5 and 10 different managers. And a third of them were absolutely terrible, had net negative impact on their experience. They felt worse after talking to them. So it's a little bit of a get out of jail free card in a way, or a jailbreak. When they have this opportunity to work from home, they don't have to spend time with a toxic or a bad manager.
Yeah, get out of jail free, but that's surely only going to last for a short amount of time. It's only going to kind of extend the fact that they're still going to leave. There's still going to be a statistic in this resignation. It just might be a little bit later.
And this, as a manager myself, and for anyone who's a leader or manager on the line or listening, it feels like an incredible burden. Well, burden's the wrong word, but an incredible responsibility when we know that we have this much impact on the daily experiences of the people in our team. So up to 70% of the variance in experience comes down to your local immediate line manager. But it's also a privilege, because if you think about that, sorry?
And an opportunity, right? Like
absolutely,
it's a burden, but it's a privilege and an opportunity to
That's it.
to play such a huge part in the organization, but also in someone's life.
Right. Exactly. If your manager sees you, acknowledges your contribution, recognizes you, thanks you, gives you freedom and autonomy, knows your strengths, wow, that's a different place to be.
Yeah. And this comes back down to the point of, to get this right, one of the key points for this year and one of our key focuses should be around management capability, how to measure and how to build people via their strengths, and how to have great performance conversations, and how to empower and give autonomy, but also how to understand how to do that in this new way of working.
It's that retooling, I think, is essential. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we had some of the key themes that came out from our report, and there were 5. Yeah, there were 5 key themes. The first one was around the culture of wellbeing, and I know we've talked about this, and you've shared some data around wellbeing and satisfaction and wellbeing engagement and how they're starting to change. But there's some stuff you want to talk about in here, and then some stuff I want to talk about. Well, so what? Like it's all great hearing all this research, but for anyone listening, what can they go away and do differently as a result? Right. So do you want to share a little bit on this, Claire?
Well, this one's quite staggering because, as you can see here, we've been tracking this through the World Poll since 2010, and it was remaining quite stable in terms of employee perception of the organization caring about their well-being. This particular question, my organization cares about my overall well-being, is a really strong signal. It's got a very high prediction around likelihood to leave and productivity. But you can see here what a bumper it's been over the last couple of years. So there was this initial, wow, COVID, unprecedented, we're all in this together, grateful to have my job. That initial response just zoomed up this perception that the organization cares about the well-being. 2 years later, we're in a very different situation where people are actually feeling like that hasn't evolved to where it needs to be today. Burnout is at an all-time high, especially more so for women. The increased stress, as I mentioned earlier, daily worry, depression, sadness, daily sentiment around those elements, and just workload. So this real forensic focus on productivity to survive a crisis has resulted in incredible burnout for a lot of people. And there's no longer that strong sense that this organization cares about my well-being. So that's something that really needs to be addressed. When we at Gallup talk about well-being, it's slightly different, I think, to most in that, and on the next slide, you'll see there are 5 key elements to well-being that we identified: career well-being or purpose, which is liking what you do every day; social well-being, which is about having meaningful connections in your life; financial, which is not about how much money you have, more about how well you manage it; community, liking where you live and feeling safe; and then the physical, it's not about being an elite athlete, it's more about having enough energy to do the things that you need to do through the day. And I know that, Ruth, you also include spiritual, which a lot of approaches do, and we'd see that almost wrapped around and in all of those elements. But here, these are the 5 key elements that we want to think about. Now, the workplace has a huge impact on the others, because if you've got a strong sense of liking what you do every day, and that is a positive experience, then you've got more robust social connections, you've got financial security, you've got a sense of community. So it does impact a lot of those others, along with the fact that we do it so many more days of the week than we do not work.
Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. We've got the same mental, physical, emotional, social, financial, and spiritual well-being, which is not necessarily religious, but
Right.
all of those different key elements. And good organizations recognize that well-being is all of those things, not just yoga classes and running retreats and apples and fruit baskets, right? But holding each other accountable to that as well. Some of these so what in this is, what can an organization do to truly and really ensure that their well-being is being met? There are so many things from here we go. Gregory's got an example here: working with a company to add timeframes to email follow-ups so people aren't feeling to be expected to address things immediately. Thank you, Gregory. I know of an organization that has curfews. You can still send and work at the times that work for you best, but it's not going to land in other people's inboxes until the next day. Lisa's shared with us that she found managing boundaries in her previous role incredibly challenging. As a single mum working full-time, really struggled to switch off and actually be present for her daughter. And it was actually a reason that she left. So you're going to lose talent like Lisa if we're not really truly supporting our people in their overall well-being. As Coach The Difference said, using that commute time to focus on well-being. And when we talk about helping people with their social needs, can we have the social activities, but also with a responsibility to hold each other accountable to that well-being, and the collective vulnerability as well. The bit we talked about, the leaders being vulnerable and open about their own mental, physical, financial, spiritual well-being, and helping set the tone that it's okay to talk about these things. In fact, it's encouraged to support one another. And this is your one, Claire, around thriving, struggling, suffering. You talked about this already and how you measure well-being, didn't you?
Yeah, definitely. So it is something that we track. We also recommend that organizations would track it. Again, back to that, have we got the right dashboards? Are we measuring the right things? Not just profit, but the people element and that net positive impact that we're leaving on people's lives. So one of the methodologies that we use to measure an organization's well-being is what we call net thriving. And we have a scale. The scale is readily available in our Wellbeing in the Workplace book, but also online. And it's a net thriving aggregate. And it's important to measure, particularly if organizations are not doing it now. As part of ESG, the S in the ESG, there will be an obligation to measure, what proportion of your workplace are thriving, who are struggling, and who are suffering. And how do we address the suffering piece? How do we support the struggling? And how do we get more thriving? So that's something that we do recommend that organizations do and have accountability around.
Yeah, thank you. We've talked about some of these stats already, haven't we? Managers accounting for at least 70% and engaged employers 70% of the time able to comfortable about their well-being. I really like that last stat. Direct reports of thriving supervisors are 15% more likely to still be thriving 6 months later. Talking about leadership shadows, talking about management capabilities as well. So again, the same research is bringing up these different stories, and they're all coinciding there.
Yeah, it's that old story about putting your own oxygen mask on first. And I think for leaders, particularly middle level leaders, their propensity to burnout is a lot higher because they're managing up, they're managing out, they're managing down. They probably have their own deliverables, and so what we're seeing is engagement of those groups and well-being is even lower than those that they support, which means they're almost kind of buffering or shielding their teams in a way. And so it's particularly important for leaders and managers to be really aware of their own well-being and managing that so that they can boost that of others.
Yeah, I find that the same with my kids. If I'm not okay, then I can't look after the kids very well.
Yes.
So the same principle, just in a very different environment.
Yes.
One of the other themes that came out from our research was around building good communities and helping people with their social connections. And meaningful social connections have a really positive impact on physical and mental well-being. So this all really links. So some of the so what here is around giving an equal focus when you're looking at building communities to both in the office and virtual. So a lot of the community stuff is starting to only really happen in the office, but can you still do that, and can you find ways to still build that community? Creating more reasons for in-person opportunities we've talked about, and making sure that whatever you're doing around community is inclusive and that everyone is having a voice. Otherwise it can be quite detrimental. And one thing that's really we talked about resignation, people moving and the mobility and everyone moving jobs, or not everyone, but a large proportion of people moving jobs at the moment. There's a huge proportion of new starters that are starting in organizations that are never actually seeing people or only ever seeing people from here up in a kind of, right, let's get on to our next call setting. So there's a big talent pool that we might be missing in their first 100 days or their first 30 days that we really need to be focusing on when we're building our community. Anything else for you on community, Claire?
No, I think that's a really great call out in terms of that initial attachment to an organization and that belongingness. When a new starter joins an organization, there's that initial honeymoon period. We see in our data engagement sky high. There's this sense of enthusiasm, and it does drop off, and it drops off a lot faster if there's not a very robust community approach to onboarding, that connectivity, that belongingness. Strengths is a great icebreaker or meeting tool, because when people have a shared language around my top 5 strengths, for example, it's a great way to connect with someone human to human and break the ice, if you will. So that's used in a lot of onboarding programs to create that sense of community.
We just had a new team member recently join us at Inspiring Workplaces, and it was the exact same approach we took. So it's great to hear that.
Right.
The next piece for us, number 3 of 5 was around structure. We've talked a lot about this. This is what I keep harping on about, that creating reasons over rules for people, but giving them the structure within that. So yes, people want flexibility, but they also need some sort of structure. So we need to take that need for human interaction, instead of forcing people back and giving them quotas, give them the structure that they need, but the autonomy to make their own decisions. We talked about output versus input, management capability, and how to manage in that way, and letting go of historical policies. Just because that has been the way your company has done something for 100 years, I mean, they've just been through a once in 100-year event, your organization. So why are you still doing things that you were doing pre-pandemic that just don't work for this new way of working anymore? So let it go, as Elsa said in Frozen, and start focusing more on new policies and the reasons for doing things, and creating workspaces that people want, not that you think they want. This comes back to speaking to your employees and understanding what they want. There's an amazing organization that I know of who went and asked every single person in their organization, we're going to build a new office. What do you want? And there was everything from we want a pub on site. They got it. Through to we want to bring our own desk lamps, through to there were so many different suggestions, but everyone had a voice in what that new building looked like, and everyone had a part to play in that. And no surprises, that company is absolutely thriving right now and has been. So let people decide collaboratively how they're going to create structure in how they work in this new way of working. The fifth of the sixth one for us is around voice. Employee voice is at the core. I mean, we've mentioned it so many times, but is at the core of absolutely everything that we're doing and everything we've discussed so far. But it is a new challenge in how we're capturing employee voice. And if you're just surveying your people once a year or twice a year, that's probably, well, definitely not enough. And how are you capturing voice in virtual environments? And how are you capturing people? How are you including everyone in that? From resource groups to community groups. But one of the most important and most powerful ways is ensuring that you're still having one-to-ones with people. Might sound like old-fashioned. We don't pull someone into a meeting room for a one-to-one anymore, but are we still checking in with our people and ensuring that their voices are heard? So another really important piece for us. Anything for you, Claire, on voice?
I think you've said it all. It's about the meaningful conversations. If we go back to that earlier point, everything we know about engagement and well-being can be summed up in 3 words: other people matter. And there's entire organizations that are scaling for how to have a meaningful conversation. So yeah, totally agree. Continuous listening. We're seeing a lot of organizations moving towards continuous listening programs. In terms of like really smart pulsing strategies, not survey fatigue, but just smart pulsing strategies around the things that really matter. So completely agree.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that as well. Yeah. And the final piece, and probably a really nice way to end this, is that people want gratitude, right? It's been tough. It has been really, really tough. And people are seeking out that validation after such a long and hard time of pushing through and carrying on and pulling together and making it work. But there's not as much gratitude. The way in how we reward our people has changed. The way in how people perceive their rewards and the importance of them has changed as well. And the way in which we show gratitude to one another has changed. There isn't as much of the pat on the back in the corridor or the big grandeur thank you at the all hands stand-up meetings, because those are not existing in the same way anymore. So we really need to look at this whole gratitude piece from a reward and benefits perspective, right the way through to how, again, managers are rewarding and showing gratitude to their people, but also peer-to-peer. Also aligning how we're rewarding our people and how we are showing gratitude to the overall purpose of the organization. A really, really important one, but we're purpose-led. We've talked about that. People who understand and have a strong sense of purpose are more likely to thrive. We've talked about that as well. So if people know that they are contributing towards that overall purpose, they're going to feel that sense of gratitude. So help people look at the bigger picture and let them know they're doing a great job.
Definitely.
Any parting words for you, Claire, on this piece of gratitude or overall, really?
Well, I'll do the piece of gratitude and then I'll wrap up overall, because I know you wanted to keep to your 52 minutes. So on this piece, to make it really practical, it needs to be time bound. So people need to be acknowledged once every 7 days. So if you're wondering, well, how often do I need to thank people or acknowledge them or check in with them, that weekly cycle is a really good indication. Any longer and they feel ignored. So it's a really strong signal for the most highly connected, energized and engaged teams is I've received recognition or praise in the last 7 days. So that's on that piece. And then I just wanted to thank you for joining me and inviting me to be here. It's been really good fun, and I'll let you wrap it all up. But I think there's been some really great insights that you've shared today.
Yeah, well, and you as well, Claire. I mean, thank you. We've got this big slide gratitude up and we're thanking each other. But thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our chat. I've really enjoyed sharing research, but also sharing what we think is going to be really important for the future. And hopefully, if you're listening, some really useful nuggets for you. We did go over 52 minutes, but we haven't lost any live listeners. So you must be enjoying some of the content. Thank you to people that have contributed through the comments section. Feel free to continue the chat if you're watching this on demand in the comments section. We will include some links to some of this research if you are watching it on demand, or it will be available very soon. So we'll include some of the links to a lot of the research that Claire has mentioned, and also to our Global Perspectives report. So thank you, Claire. Thank you for all of the amazing work that Gallup have been doing for so many years in so many countries, bar two. So thank you. So helpful. It's nice to see different research coming together to help change the world through the world of work. So
I'm so aligned as well. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, so that's thank you from Claire at Gallup, and thank you from me, Inspiring Workplaces, and we'll see you all very soon.